Share my screen. Okay, so we're going to go over homework 7 quickly, and then we'll get into bubble sort. You did selection sort in your lab on Tuesday, which should not have been overly difficult. This isn't something that's often used, so just kind of getting us into the practice of sorting, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. Let's see. So I want to also, I guess next week is fall break on Thursday. So my initial intention was to have the midterm exam on Thursday, but we'll do it the following Tuesday. And we'll talk about it in class next Tuesday for what to expect. But as usual, my exams are 10 questions. It'll be online on Blackboard. The exam will, if you do poorly on it, you can replace it with whatever you get on the final exam. So this should give you an idea of what you've learned up to this point and where you need to play catch up, and hopefully you can fix any poor grade you get on it. Okay, questions about the exam before I go on? I won't go into the details of it, but if you have a quick question, if you want to study over the weekend or something, I'm happy to assist. But otherwise, I'll go through the slides on Tuesday, kind of pretending like I'm writing the exam and saying what's important. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a repository here for homework 7, which was what was due on Tuesday. So I will create new repository, CSC250, fall 2020, homework 7. This in the Eclipse workspace, create the repository, go in here, I'll create a new Java project. We'll call this guy homework 7. I'll put it in that new folder. I'm not happy about something. I need to move this so I can see it. I was saying it overlaps another project. Must not have liked the way I named it. All right, so I'll hit finish. I won't create the module. All right. Oh, and just so I don't forget, I need to end today maybe right around 12:20-ish, 25-ish, somewhere in there, so I can I need to get to an event across town. That should at 1 o'clock. That should get me enough time, but whatever. That'll be good enough. We'll get everything done in that period of time. All right, so I'll go in here. I'll go ahead and create my driver. I'll create my class. This guy driver. I think I've shown this to you before, but if you've gotten to the point where you've memorized your Hello World program pretty well, you could always hit this little checkbox here that says add a main method to it. And it'll go ahead and write main for you real quick. I'd only encourage you to do that once you get to the point where you're like bored of having to type the same thing over and over again, which means that you've probably gotten to the point where you understand the material well enough and don't need to keep doing it through muscle memory. But know it's there for when you have to write it, but until then, keep writing it by hand. And then I want to go ahead and create my data.dat. So I'll create a file. We'll call this guy data.dat in the source code folder. And I'll steal all of that. And this is thanks to, I think I took it from Emily's homework. So I stole your data. So there you go. Credit where credit is due. And then we want to go ahead and let's see, the homework was we read in Bible books. So we already have our Bible book class. So let's go ahead and grab that from, what was that, homework 4-ish, something like that. I think we were doing a bunch of them inside here. That's person. Oh, homework 5. Yeah, here's our Bible book. So I'll just steal this real quick. I'll close all this because that rest of that's just fraught with danger for me. Right click, new class, Bible book. So there's that stuff in there. And let's see. Allows user to search through a summary of the books for a given keyword. We're looking at an array list of Bible books. Okay, so I'm going to do this in a kind of a little bit of an upgraded way. Well, actually, let's just write it first, and then we'll suck the stuff into an upgraded way a little bit. So we want to create an array list of Bible books. Let me quickly steal my code for reading in from a file here. Probably in here, right? Good enough. Exception there. While input dot has next. And this should just print all the, what did I call it? I called it data.dat, right? There we go. All right, so I have all the books, and does my Bible book have a constructor that takes in a string? It does. So I should be able to now create individual Bible books from those. Looks like I was doing some example stuff in here, so let me clean that up a little bit. Okay. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to create an array list to hold my Bible book. So I'll have an array list of Bible book called the books is equal to a new array list of Bible book. And I'll import java.util.ArrayList. Okay, and then each time through, I want to add to my array list. So the books dot add new Bible book. And the Bible book I'm going to be adding is going to be created using the string. So I have two different constructors in my Bible book class. I have the one that takes in the three different individual components, and then I have one that takes in a string and goes ahead and splits it for me and does all that. So I'll go ahead and build a new Bible book using that string, and I'll store the resulting Bible book in my array list of Bible books. All right, and then for this assignment, we were to allow the user to search the summaries and return the first Bible book found that has a certain keyword in the summary. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll just write a little function down here. We'll have this guy be static, void, search summaries. And he's going to take in my Bible books. And I'll go ahead and create a scanner for reading in from the user. So I'll actually close my scanner up here. Scanner input is equal to new scanner. But now I'm asking the user for a search term. So this will be coming in from system.in. All right. Now, hold on, what's in the chat here? Emily stole it from Jason, so technically it's Jason's text. All right, so we'll go ahead and ask the user. Well, I guess we'll just do it. We'll just ask them once and just test it. So we'll say system.out.print, enter a search term. We'll go ahead and read it in. All right, and then we want to go ahead and search through our entire array list, looking at the summary in each of our books for an element. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an ability to my Bible book called search summary. Public Boolean search summary. So I'll take a search term in as a parameter. And this guy will return true if the search term is found in this book's summary and false otherwise. So we're going to go through this entire book's summary looking for that search term. Now, there's a couple of different ways we could do this. Presumably, the term they're entering in is a single word, but I guess it could be something larger than that. So a couple different things we can do here. We can either use the substring method. So if I go to Java documentation here, Java string class, we can look at substring and see that actually index of will do it as well. Actually, index of would probably be better. I think I showed you index of, that there's a second version that you can pass it a string. So here's index of, where you can pass it a string. It'll return the index within the string of the first occurrence of the specified substring, or -1 if it's not found. Okay, so I can use index of to tell me whether something is found in there. So I'll say, now all I care about here is whether or not it is in there or not. I don't care where it's at. I don't care what it says. I just care whether it's in there, because I'm supposed to return the name of the book where that search term is first found. So I'll go ahead and I'll say return this dot summary dot index of. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say this dot summary dot to lowercase. That way we are case insensitive. You know, I'm basically going to compare my lowercase version of my summary to my lowercase version of my search term, so that if somebody uses a lowercase letter as opposed to an uppercase letter, it'll still find a match. So this dot summary dot to lowercase dot index of, and I'm going to pass it search term dot to lowercase. Now this guy is going to return a number. Now I want to know whether or not I want to return true if it returns something other than -1. So if it gives me something other than -1, that means it did find it. You could also say greater than -1 if you want. So I will look in here for that lowercase version of my search term inside the lowercase version of my summary. And if it finds it, meaning that it's not equal to -1, I'll return true. Otherwise, it will return a false. So this guy lets me ask, is a particular book, does it have the search term in it? So now I can ask a Bible book to search itself for a search term. So I've encapsulated that code within there. So now we've read in our term. I'm going to go through my entire list of Bible books. Now, array lists are iterable. So I'll actually write this two different ways. I don't remember if I showed you the for each loop for an array list. So we'll say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than the books.size I plus plus. So this will go through every element of this array list. And each time through, I'm going to say if the books dot get index I, that guy is a Bible book, dot search summary for my term. If that returns true, I want to go ahead and print out the name of this book. System.out.println the books.get I.get name. And then I'll break out of my for loop, because my loop is now done. I've done what I've come here to do. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and I'll say driver.search summaries, and I'll pass it the books. And it should ask me my question. Let me just review my data here. Here, we'll do a search for Paul. First time I see it in Romans. Yep, Romans, first book, first letter to the churches. So we'll go ahead and run this, enter a term. We're going to search for Paul, and we get Romans. If we, let's search for oppression. Oy, oy, oy. And we get 1 Peter. So on and so forth. Okay, so and then the alternate version of this for loop is you could write it as a for each loop. So I can say for a book in the books. This is Bible book. Then I can ask if a book search summary term, then I can say a book get name. Like that. So this is a for each loop. So this is kind of like saying in Python for a book in the books. That's what the Python equivalent of that for loop looks like. Okay, well, I was searching for this guy here. Okay, so make pretty good sense. I think that solves the previous homework assignment. So any questions about that? I'll go ahead and publish it, make it public. So that should now be up on GitHub. Okay, now we're going to expand this a little bit. So we have this idea of a Bible book. Now we might want to create another class that allows us to do things with Bible books. Now we're going to kind of expand our idea here a little bit, not that we're going to actually build this in there. We're going to say our summary is effectively the text of the book itself. But I mean, certainly we could create a collection of Bible books. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Is that the right thing here? Actually, I want it that. There we go. So I'm going to, in my default package, I'm going to create a new class, and this is going to be a Bible book collection. So we're kind of encapsulating things. We're trying to move as much of that detail into our objects as possible. Thinking back to last semester when we talked about the difference between a procedural language, the procedural telephone, and the object-oriented telephone, where we saw the pile of wires versus something that looks like a telephone. So even though there isn't too much scary stuff out here in Driver, the more we can pull into other classes, the cleaner our driver will look like. So I'm going to create a Bible book collection. And our Bible book collection is going to maintain an array list of Bible books. So private array list, Bible book, called the books. I'll go ahead and import java.util for array list. I'll make my constructor here for Bible book collection. And we're going to go ahead and say this collection has a name. Actually, do we need to give it a name? Let's say no. So we'll say this dot the books is equal to a new array list of Bible book. All right, so now we have, we defined our private field up here. We gave it a value right here. So this is where we actually say the books is equal to new array list Bible book. You could have put this part of it up here. That would not have been the end of the world. But typically constructors are said to initialize an object. And part of initializing a Bible book collection is going to be to give a value to that array list. Okay, so now I have that guy. So now I want to have the ability to add a Bible book to my collection. So we can add a Bible book by, I can say public void add Bible book, and I can say Bible book B, and then this dot the books dot add B, and that will add a Bible book. But similarly, because I can create Bible books using a string, I could write a second version. We looked at this a couple classes ago when we looked at the println method, how it has a whole bunch of methods named println that take different parameters. So we have this idea of something called, and we talked about it last semester, polymorphism. So this is more than one method with the same name, but a different number and or type of parameters. And really, when I say method here, I'm really talking about practical uses of polymorphism. It doesn't actually have to be a method. It could also be constructors. There are other examples of polymorphism. So polymorphism really says having multiple things that look the same but are actually slightly different. So we're going to say, you know what, we have one way of adding a Bible book where I can actually hand you the whole Bible book. But we also are going to have a way where we can create a Bible book where I give you a string, which is the colon delimited data. And now we can create a Bible book using that colon delimited data because Bible books can be constructed with that string. So now I can go ahead and say this dot the books dot add. I'm going to add a new Bible book using that colon delimited data. So two separate methods with the same name, but they take different parameters. I can either take in an entire Bible book and add it to my array list directly, or I can take in a colon delimited string like we're storing in our data.dat, and I can build a Bible book using that string and add it to my collection. All right, so now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and have a public string get first. Actually, let's have this guy return a Bible book. Get first book given search term. This guy will take in our search term. And now I can go out here to driver and I can steal that code. So this guy is going to take in a term that comes from somewhere. We don't have to worry about where that comes from yet. And it's going to go through all of our books in our Bible books. And I like to always specify this dot. It's not required, but I like to specify it. It also keeps the spelling more accurate. And then we're going to ask the book. We're going to, let's see, define Bible. So we have search summary. Oh, we have it in there. Here is my search summary for Bible book that takes a string, Bible book collection, A book is a Bible book. I did make my books an array list of Bible books, didn't I? Array list of Bible book. Yeah, that's right. So this will go through all of my books in there. Each time through, I'll ask a book. But why? It's public. Oh, hold on. I'm doing the same thing again. Remember I said we couldn't trust me to not put stuff in the wrong. Well, we did it again. So we have to move this guy up here to our. So there's my Bible book. I put it in homework 5 instead of homework 7. There we go. Now we have our search summary for our term. And if we're here, we'll go ahead and return a book because we found it. We don't need to print it out here. So if we found a search summary that matches, we'll return that book. If we get through all the books and never find anything, we'll go ahead and return null. Now, one thing we might want to do here, and this is where we'll start interjecting some exception handling. I can say, well, I'm going to go ahead and return null. But realistically, rather than returning a null value here, in that we look through all of our books for our search, for our search term, if we didn't find one, we could argue that, okay, I'll just return nothing. But nothing could give us a problem with null pointer exceptions on the other side of things. So one thing I can do is I can advertise. This is kind of where exception handling comes in. At this point, we've kind of ignored handling exceptions ourselves, but now we're going to raise exceptions. So I can say that rather than return a value here, I want to throw a new exception. And my new exception will be a term not found exception. That's fine. So it's going to be throw new exception, and then I have to advertise this guy throws an exception. That'll do it. Because when I get down here, if I'm still alive, that means I've searched all my Bible books. I didn't find any that matched my search term. So now as a programmer, I get to decide, well, what do I want to have happen? Well, I can say, you know what? I can go ahead and return null and just let it be somebody else's problem. And then they have to error check it. Or I can do something like this, where I can advertise that the get first book given search term function throws an exception. And then I'll go ahead and if I didn't find it, I'll just throw the exception that says term not found exception. that's now requiring somebody else in my program to have to handle the possibility that that term might not be found, rather than me coming up with a fake value to return. Okay, so I could certainly say return null and just let somebody else possibly get a null value from me and have a null pointer exception when they start trying to call functions on it. Or I can say, look, you either get a book from me, or I'll go ahead and throw an exception that you have to take into consideration when you call this might occur. All right, so I'm showing a possible exception in this case. So now we'll go back out to driver. And I'll just go ahead and dump this function here. Now for my Bible book collection, we want to be able to, so I've written a constructor here, Bible book collection, that takes in no parameters. It gives me an empty collection that I can then add Bible books to. But I could also write a second constructor here, public Bible book collection, and maybe this guy takes in a string file name. And then what I do is I go ahead and create my scanner in here. So user directory concatenated with source, concatenated with whatever the file name is. And because I don't want anybody else to be aware of what's happening in here, I'll go ahead and choose. So past, we say we'll throw an exception and then we'll just pass the buck. But what I'll go ahead and do here is I'll say I'm going to try to do this stuff. I'm going to try to read in the from the file and fill up my Bible book. I'll try to do all this stuff. And I'll say this dot the books. Now, the first thing I want to do before this happens, because right now, in fact, I'm going to actually show it to you before we get started. So I'm going to say catch exception E. I'll just do nothing for right now. We'll come and fix this in a minute. So I'm going to have a second way of creating my Bible book collection where I can pass it a file name. In this case, it'll be data.dat. It'll create my scanner for me. It'll go ahead and fill up my books array with this guy. So let me come out here. I'll just get rid of all this for right now. I'll say Bible book collection, the New Testament is equal to a new Bible book collection, and the name of my file was data.dat. Like that. All right. And what does this constructor do? This constructor comes in, it attempts to open up this file, and then fills up my books. Now, as of right now, we're going to get an error message here. I presumed we would have gotten an error message. Let me just make sure that yeah, we are getting into the exception. Oh, the reason we didn't get the error printed out is because I have it inside of a try catch. this should do. So we got a null pointer exception here. Now, when you look at our code that we have sitting in front of us right now, that gives us everything we need to know for why we have a null pointer exception. So take a look at that code and tell me, right now we are calling this constructor. And this constructor, somewhere inside this try catch, is giving me a null pointer exception. Notice it's not giving me a file not found exception. It's finding our file, but it is giving me a null pointer exception. Does anybody see why? Remember up here, we created our array list, but we didn't instantiate it until this constructor. So it's trying to add stuff into my array list before the array list actually exists. So what I could say here is I can say, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I already have a version of my constructor that goes ahead and creates my array list for me. It might do some other stuff later on, but rather than write this line a second time, I'm going to go ahead and just call my default constructor, the constructor that, and so this is how we call the constructor. Actually, we call the constructor by saying this. This is how we call our constructor, the constructor that belongs to us. Which constructor? The one that takes no parameters. So here's my constructor that takes no parameters. What does it do? It gives me a value for this array list. And now we no longer get the error because my array list is getting a value now. So when I try to add stuff to it, it's accurately adding. So no harm, no foul. Out here in driver, I now have my collection. I can go ahead and say system. Well, actually, I can say Bible book answer is equal to the New Testament dot get first book given search term, and I'll search for Paul. And then I'll go ahead and say system. Actually, don't we have an answer dot display? There we go. It wasn't this Romans. Book name Romans, 16 chapters, written by Paul, so and so. All right, so this is a little bit cleaner way of writing this, where now you see our driver is nice and short. And what do we say? We're going to build a Bible book collection with all the New Testament stuff. Then we're going to go ahead and ask that collection to get the first book given a search term. It's going to return that book for us, and then I'll just ask that book to display itself. So the same logic is happening as happened before, but let's say that I do a search for LOL. Notice now I get an exception, a term not found exception, which is something I invented. That makes sense? Now, notice here, if I take away my throws exception up here, now it's not happy at me because it's going to say, you know what, this code, this guy has an unhandled exception. So I would then have to do a try to do this stuff. Then I could catch the exception E and say system.out.println no book found, something like that. So there's an example of me using my own exception handling to say, you know what, I'm going to search for this in here. But if this guy's not found, I don't want to risk getting a null value here. So instead, I'll just try to do this. And if something goes south, I know the exception I got was the file not found, or the no term found exception that I invented. So I'll go ahead and just say no book found.
I have a question.
Sure.
Does exception E, is that just like any exception, or is that a specific something?
Yeah, this is generic exception.
Okay.
But you can name your variable whatever you want to name it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, whatever it's listed in there. All right, so just so I don't forget, let me go ahead and updated with Bible book collection. So now for your homework, notice I have selection sort example in here. This is what I asked you to write last class. And here's the algorithm for bubble sort. I also give you an example of the bubble sort algorithm here for sorting numbers. So what I'm going to do here is homework assignment. Given our updated solution to homework 7 that has a Bible book collection, add a method to Bible book collection that sorts itself using a bubble sort. It should sort itself on book names. Actually, let's do it like this. Add a sort on name method, which sorts the collection, sorts itself on book names alphabetically. Add a sort on chapter count method, which sorts itself on number of chapters from smallest to largest. Add a display method, which displays the entire collection in its sorted state. You must use a bubble sort to accomplish this. Then I'll put a hint in here. You may find the compare to method in the string class helpful for comparing strings to each other alphabetically. All right, so we're going to add to our Bible book collection 2 different sort methods. One that will sort this collection on book names alphabetically. The other one that will sort the collection on number of chapters, smallest chapters first, smallest number of chapters first, largest number of chapters last. So it's in ascending order. And then have a way of displaying your Bible books, maybe just calling display on each of the Bible books, something like that. So you have the current version of this code up. Are there any questions what I'm asking you to do here?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I asked this about the lab too, but do you want us to like actually change the array list, or do you want us to make a new one?
I would say change it in this case.
Okay.
I don't necessarily care because I could see there being value in maintaining the original order. But I would say in this case, go ahead and change it. But that's not really what I'm testing on. I'm kind of testing on the bubble, adapting the bubble sort algorithm to strings instead of numbers. So what you probably will do when you first do this guy is do the sort on chapter count first, because the sort on chapter count is effectively this bubble sort algorithm. This one does it on numbers. So you'll just have to adapt it a little bit to work with your Bible book objects. But the sort on book names is going to require you to modify this guy to work for strings instead of numbers. So whether or not you have a new array list that's the sorted version or not, I don't necessarily care, but I would recommend just changing it in place. If you really wanted to have the ability to reset it, you could just remember the original version somewhere and then have a reset function that resets it back to its original order if you wanted to, but relatively unimportant for the assignment. All right, other questions? Okay, so I will put that assignment up and upload the video. The code is already pushed to GitHub. For right now, we'll plan on still being online on Tuesday for now. I should have my test results back maybe tomorrow. So assuming I test negative, then we'll be back face-to-face and online, whatever you would like to do. But for right now, the best I can tell you is let's stay online until I get my results. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes?
I hope you stay healthy.
I feel fine. This was more just I was in the same building as the guy. This Ron Johnson happened to have an event at River Club, and I was in the building at the time.
Yeah, I saw that. That's what you said in Slack.
All right.
I'm just saying, I hope you stay healthy anyway.
Yep. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Anyway, see you on Tuesday, I guess.
Yep. Take care.
I have a question, but it's not pertaining to the homework assignment.
Sure.
So